I did not have grandfathers. Mother's dad died when I was about 6 months old, and Grandpa McCoy died when Daddy was about 13 or 14. So I never did have a grandpa. Nanny always had a garden, and she always had somebody working it for her. She spent a lot of time making sure people were busy. She also got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and swept her yard. I did not get that DNA. And I spent 3 weeks with her. She asked me when I first got there if I liked beets, and I mistakenly said yes, so I had to eat her beets I did not like for 3 weeks.
What about your other grandma?
I don't remember too much about her. She would come and visit, but not very often. And the main thing that I remember about her was that have someone pick her up to take her to their house, and she would always buy me candy, the kind that I liked. It was peanut candy, and it had some sort of a hard shell around, peanuts with a hard shell candy around it. I don't know what you call them, but they were quite good, and that was about the only time I got those. And she had long, big gray braids that she wrapped around her head, and when she took them down at night, she looked like an old Indian chief. Well, I remember them teasing me when I thought they didn't know that I was around. I remember us making homemade ice cream. That was always a big treat in the summertime, and we'd put all kinds of different things in it, like Peaches and Edlinda would send down Bing cherries from up in Washington State, and we used to make our own sausage. And I remember having to stir the fat to make lye soap. We stirred it in a black pot on the fire, and it would melt down, and we'd make lye soap out of the drippings off of it if you washed your hair with it. And it was what we used for soap a lot of the time because it was Depression days. And there was no money. It used to be my job to stir with a broomstick like a witch in a black cauldron. I don't remember minding doing it, and I remember having to churn the butter. And we had a butter churn, and we did have a mold for it. During the war, Mother made us dresses out of feed sacks. They put the chicken feed and those things in pretty printed sacks, and people made clothes out of them. And we had some very nice clothes made out of the feed sacks. She would cut her own patterns. And we did a lot of frugal things back then. And I know they always grew enough vegetables in the garden so that they had a quart of vegetables for every day during the year that they kept in a storm cellar. Mother made angel food cakes, but I never did care for them. Everybody raved over Mother's angel food cakes. I just never was real fond of them. She made a lot of good stuff. I mean, she was a really good cook, and she made a lot of really good desserts, but I just never did care for those angel food cakes. I think they're almost impossible to make, and she made lovely ones, but to me they were just a bunch of fluff. I never was real crazy about berry pie either. Everybody else was. I like peach cobbler. She always made a lot of chocolate stuff that I liked. She baked all the time. She She made things, but she never made a cookie in my whole life. I think she didn't have the patience to drop them, you know, because she made the bar type stuff and cakes and pies.
The chocolate bar.
Oh, yeah, everything except cookies. And Daddy loved cookies better than anything. She made fun of me for buying frozen pie crust. She made wonderful pie crust with no effort. I never could make a pie crust. And then after her hands got so bad, she was buying frozen pie crust, and I got a good laugh out of it. See, they're not so bad, are they? The only things I was allowed to do was go to the movies and school functions and church. And on Saturdays they had movies that they were continued from Saturday to Saturday afternoon. And we always went to the matinees if we could get somebody to take us to town. And we played volleyball at the church 2 nights a week in the summer. And that was pretty much our social life. And I used to ride the horse a lot. I enjoyed that. Except when she slipped and fell on the bridge with me and hit my head, which is what's wrong with me now. And I had a little concussion and lost about 24 hours in there. We went to church a lot. We had a party line telephone that had 9 people on it. So everybody listened on the party line and knew what everybody else was doing. And Mary called and told Mother that they weren't going to get to come for a couple of weeks because Scotty had a truckload of hoers coming on the weekend to chop his cotton. When the phone rang, everybody rushed to pick it up and see what was going on with everybody else. So it was kind of like having a local newspaper. And one Sunday night, Sue and I went to the movie with our dates, and Ruby grabbed by and went to church and told everybody that we went to the movies instead of coming to church, and that she heard it on the telephone. Everybody pretty much knew what everybody else was doing at any given time. If a car drove down the road and they didn't know who it was, they got excited. Oh, and I used to bring people home with me from Sunday school to ride the horse. And the horse didn't mind if one person rode, but she got very unhappy if 2 people rode. And one Sunday I was holding her, and the second person tried to get on, and she bit me on the elbow. After that, we just rode one person at the time. Well, they left home when I was about 8 years old. So most of the time they weren't around because they're 7 and 9 years older than I am. And when Ed graduated, or right after he graduated from high school, he went into service. World War II started. And Mary went out of town to work. So they weren't around very much. And I guess I was 12 or just turned 13 when they got married. So I wasn't very old. And I remember having a lot of fun with them. We played cards and stuff. Of course, there wasn't any TV or anything in those days. We had radios, but they had mostly static on them. But we played dominoes, and we played cards. And we used to play Chinese checkers, stuff like that. Alma Doss was a big influence. She did 4-H for us. She took me to county meet to participate in what's similar to UIL now, and that's when I got the ribbon in storytelling. I got to eat in the cafeteria for the first time, and she didn't have any children at the time, but she was a really, really good mentor for the girls in the community. Most of our parents were too busy to participate with us in anything, but she took the time and was a very good influence. And then another teacher I had was the principal, Mr. Winkleman, in high school, and he's the one that made me go to college. And he told me I needed to do that instead of taking a business course because I would have college credits, and to take all of the business administration courses first, and I would get everything I would get in a business course, and I'd have the hours so that I could finish it up and get a degree. And the biggest mistake I probably made, or the dumbest thing I did, was not go ahead and get a degree because I enjoyed school. But the folks didn't have much money, and they made a big deal about how expensive it was, and so I quit and went to work for a year and I was a clerk typist. They had a bookkeeping job and a clerk typist job, but they paid the same amount. The clerk typist, at the end of the day, you go home and don't worry about it. So I took that one. And I worked for Texas Electric for about a year also in the office. And I worked for Caulfield Lumber Company for probably about a year, doing bookkeeping, reunions, all. And I think the most fun I've had with it was when we went to Oklahoma for the weekend to the resort. That was a lot of fun.
The whole family was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a nice weekend. And the thing I'm proudest of is the family, because they turned out well, very well. Mm-hmm. Kennedy's inauguration. About froze to death, but we saw it.
Motorcade passed right by you?
Oh yeah, we had seats on the bleachers. And that was the year that Lyndon Johnson was the vice president. So the San Marcos band marched in the inaugural parade. And I had a chance to be in that. Mr. Kleinsmith told me I could play drums. Somebody he knew was the director, but I didn't have time because I had to work in the library and study and have a social life. So the band was not a possibility. Played a snare drum, but I enjoyed it. We marched mainly at the football game contest. We were in one parade in Austin. We marched down Congress Avenue. Yeah, it's something that is valuable even if you don't use it in the way that you anticipate, like Eddie. Mm-hmm. He still got a lot out of it, so it's definitely worthwhile.
Well, love you, Mom. Thanks for doing this.
Yes.